Hey everyone, Xeon over here from Nintendo Life, and today we're here to share with you our review of Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes on the Nintendo Switch. Now, this review was originally written by Mitch Vogel for NintendoLife.com, but was reworked into this video by me. The PS1 played host to a staggering number of memorable and influential RPGs, one of which was Konami's Suikoden. After the strong initial debut came a handful of sequels that eventually puttered out during the 6th generation of consoles, and aside from a few upcoming remakes of the first two games in the series, Konami has virtually abandoned Suikoden since. However, not once to be stifled, some key members of the Suikoden crew eventually left Konami and founded a new team called Rabbit and Bear, which started a successful crowdfunding campaign for this spiritual successor called Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes. After a 4-year development cycle, the game is finally in our hands, and while it has its share of issues, this is overall a deeply enjoyable and nostalgic JRPG that we're sure is going to get a lot of love. The story is set in the fictional land of Alran, and begins by focusing on the rising tensions between the powerful imperial country of Galdea and a neighboring province called the League of Nations. Though there are technically 3 protagonists to the narrative, your main character to begin with is Noah, a chipper young man from a quiet border village who joins a small peacekeeping military unit known as the Watch. Noah and his team go about their business quelling bandit raids and helping people to the best of their ability, but soon find themselves caught in the middle of much larger political tension that eventually gives way to war between the Empire and the League. To reclaim his homeland and avenge his losses, Noah thus sets out to build a resistance and defeat the Galdeans. Though it feels like the pacing of the narrative can move in fits and starts in a lot of places, we admire the scope of the story here. Any way you cut it, properly balancing over 100 unique characters and detailing all the various international conflicts affecting them is a tough ask for any writing team. And whatever depth is lost in the overarching plot is found in the individual characterization. Though not every member of the titular 100 Heroes is equally fleshed out, there's nonetheless a core cast here that develops naturally as they experience the war together and grow closer because of it. It's a solid story all around, if one that feels unwieldy every so often. Gameplay follows the traditional JRPG template of visiting towns, clearing out monsters and dungeons, and slowly exploring a grand world full of adventure and potential. It's nothing you haven't seen before, but the gameplay loop is executed well here, buoyed by the ongoing character recruitment system. As flagged in the title, there are over 100 party members you can persuade to join your cause, and while not all can be brought into battle, they add a lot of variety to the adventure. Some party members end up being the reward offered at the end of their own meaningful side quests, such as an early recruit who actually helped us through a dungeon in a brief subplot, so together we could defeat the monster at the end, while others will join simply by triggering a brief cutscene after walking near them. Admittedly, those that fall into this latter group feel a bit like leftovers from cut content, but we nonetheless appreciated the relatively brisk pace at which you're meeting and engaging with this colorful cast. Though some of the characters are a little shallow and defined only by their gimmick, each one is memorable and adds something worthwhile to the growing ragtag bunch. Our favorite recruit was a sweet, gentle healer you meet relatively early on in the game, who flies into an unfettered rage at the slightest provocation. As you crawl through the dungeons scattered throughout the land, you'll often get pulled into random battles, which are one of the most obvious homages to Suikoden. Here, you command a team of up to 6 characters, 3 in the front and 3 in the back, in turn-based combat. A timeline at the top of the screen will always show you the order in which enemies and allies will act, and while you can't mess around with this like you could in something like Grandia or Octopath Traveler, it lets you prioritize enemies during battle. Something we particularly enjoyed is the boss fights, which often feature a gimmick that changes how you approach them. Not only are these battles a good test of your team building capabilities, these gimmicks can add a wholly unique dimension and an almost puzzle-like element to the boss battles. There's one boss that has a series of rock walls that targeted characters can hide behind, while another sees your foe operating a machine that does big damage, but can be turned against them if you engage with it at the right time. And at key boss fights in the story, you can also engage in dramatic one-on-one duels, which operate on an almost rock-paper-scissors-esque system. Here, you have to clearly plan when to press the offensive on your opponent and when to counter an impending strike, all in the hopes of building up to a big break attack to shatter their guard and drain their health bar. These duels often feel just as tense as the story paints them out to be, and we particularly appreciated how they also act as a sort of dialogue-filled cutscene, taking place between the dueling characters. Outside of the typical JRPG gameplay loop, there are also a few other mechanics worth mentioning. At major story points, you'll sometimes find yourself pulled into a large-scale battle in war mode, which plays out like a mini Advance Wars style fight, where party members each command their own platoons that you order around on a small grid. Routing foes this way can be fun, but the battles are too small for deep strategizing, and it can get a little dull watching all the combat animations play out while you twiddle your thumbs and wait for the game to give you back control. Additionally, there's some town-building gameplay that acts as an extended side quest incentivizing you to routinely return to base. Here you can invest resources and assign new recruits to build up various parts of the village, granting some gameplay benefits while also acting as a fun time sink as you decide on how to decorate the town. It's clearly not the main focus of the adventure, but we appreciated having a home to return to after completing another quest, and it's rewarding to see it grow and flourish over time. Eiyuden Chronicle was obviously created as a loving homage to JRPGs of yesteryear, but sometimes it feels like it adheres just a little too much to some of the more tedious and archaic elements of the genre. One early quest sees a character asking you to travel to a specific dungeon to retrieve 3 boar skins before he'll join your crew. Of course, this dungeon happens to be all the way on the other side of the map, and you can't fast travel to it. So you have to walk all the way there and then literally run around in circles once inside, hoping that the next random encounter will feature the required enemy that you need. What should be a 5-minute errand at most, thus becomes a 15 to 20 minute exercise in tedium. And there's a lot of points where the game drags things out just like this without justifying the added length. So from a purely design and mechanical perspective, Eiyuden Chronicle is a pretty decent JRPG, but one place in which the Switch version drops the ball pretty hard is performance. Unfortunately, this game simply doesn't run well on Switch, and you're reminded of this almost constantly throughout the adventure. Though the frame rate targets 30 FPS, the only time you'll actually see it anywhere near that is when you're in a really small and static area, like an item shop or a house. Everywhere else, the frame rate will often take enormous dips into much choppier territory, and it's especially noticeable in most dungeons and all of the overworld. We wish frame drops were the extent of the technical issues, but there's unfortunately more to cover. The load times are uncomfortably long, and there are loads everywhere as you progress. You'll be hit with a loading screen of anywhere from 4 to 7 seconds every time a random encounter triggers, and you'll have to sit through another one just as soon as the fight is over. Sometimes the fight itself is shorter than the load times. This problem with loading even extends to aspects you wouldn't expect it to, such as the menus. Every time you open the main menu to tinker with your inventory or party setup, you have to sit through a short but noticeable load for literally each individual tab on the menu, and you'll have to endure those little loads anew every time you close and reopen the menu screen to do something else. Over the course of 50 or so hours, that could add genuine hours to your playtime. The technical issues don't stop there either though, as there are also occasional soft locks which require you to close the game, praying that there was a somewhat recent autosave. We encountered a particularly egregious example of this where the game got stuck in a loop on a loading screen after completing a nearly 40-minute gauntlet of skirmishes, boss battles, and plot-heavy cutscenes with not a single save crystal in sight. Of course, upon reloading, we discovered that the game's last autosave was only just before all of this kicked off. Though we feel it would be hyperbolic to call Eiyuden Chronicle a technical disaster on the Switch, its performance is certainly not good, and we're hoping that the team is working on patches to bring it up to an acceptable level. None of the issues here, with perhaps the exception of the soft locks, are outright game-breaking, but they all combine to make for something that feels like a distinctly substandard experience on Switch. Despite all the issues though, we'd say that Eiyuden Chronicle is still worth your time if you're a JRPG fan, but we'd encourage you at minimum to wait a bit past launch to see if these problems get cleared up. They could be worse, sure, but they could also be a lot better, and it's rather disappointing to see an otherwise wonderful game released in such a state. Performance woes aside, Eiyuden Chronicle otherwise features excellent presentation. The visuals call to mind the art styles of other modern retro RPGs such as Octopath Traveler 2 and Star Ocean's Second Story R, meshing highly detailed 2D sprites with 3D environments and models. Though the 3D stuff here feels a little too blocky and murky, the high quality sprite work helps to distract from this though, overall leaving a good impression. The soundtrack is similarly pleasing, featuring a satisfying array of music that adequately captures the scope of the adventure, while also leaving plenty of room for its quieter moments. Whether you're hearing the rousing track that first plays when you enter the overworld, or the woodwinds-laced music of entering another village, it feels like the music really adds that extra needed layer for enhancing immersion. Overall, it's a very relaxing collection of tunes, but it fits the tone of the narrative well for the most part. Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes is the epitome of a flawed gem. The kind of game that does a lot of things right, and we're sure will command a dedicated legion of fans, but has legitimate problems that are tough to overlook. The expansive narrative, gorgeous sprite work, and addictive combat all help to make it an easy recommendation to any classic JRPG fan. But bear in mind that it can feel dated in its design philosophy, and the Switch version has a lot of performance problems, at least at launch. If you can get past those issues, this is an enjoyable and immersive RPG that mostly achieves what it set out to do. We here at Nintendo Life give Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes on the Nintendo Switch a 6 out of 10. Now, if you'd like to check out our written review and find even more coverage of Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes, you can head over to nintendolife.com. And of course, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos like this, then why don't you tell 100 heroes all about that subscribe button and make sure they click it, and then ring that notification bell to be notified whenever we put up new videos. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you, Mitch, for spending so much of your time once again with a massive RPG like this. I'm Zion from Nintendo Life. Stay safe out there, and we will see you all next time.